And welcome to Stratcom Talks online webinar titled Falsification of History. My name is Olga Dragileva and I am an investigative journalist here in Latvia. I will be hosting this event today. We apologize, this event was supposed to take place on the November 25th. We apologize for having to reschedule it, and we thank all of you watching for coming back today. So today we will talk about history as a tool in Russia's foreign policy and in the campaigns abroad. We will discuss narratives that are being used and that are being spread, who are these narratives targeting, and also what are the ways to tackle them. We have a great set of experts for you today. All of them are authors to the NATO Stratcom Center of Excellence research paper titled Abuse of History as Russia's Tool of Foreign Influence. The paper will be published later in December. About the program for this hour. Firstly, our speakers will present their research findings, and then they will answer questions from me and also from you, the audience. Please, if you have any, ask your questions, write any suggestions for the discussion or any other comments in the comment section under our live broadcasts in Facebook and also in YouTube. I will try to forward those questions to our experts. And now it is great pleasure for me to introduce our first speaker, Kati Parppei. Kati Parppei is an adjunct professor and docent of Russian history at the Department of Geographical and Historical Studies at the University of Eastern Finland and a life member at Clare Hall, University of Cambridge, United Kingdom. She specializes in Russian history, borderland issues, historical image studies, and long-term developments in the uses of history. In her current project, Images and Attributes of Enemies in Pre-Revolutionary Russia, she has examined the formation and development of enemy images in Russia, from the medieval period to the revolution of 1917. This creates a basis for understanding current practices and decisions in the field of history politicization in Russia. Welcome, Kati.
Thank you very much, Olga, and good afternoon, everybody. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say a couple of words of Finland in the context of falsification of history. I'll make first some general notions of the issue according to my understanding, and then I also very shortly present two recent cases of this phenomenon in Finland. And I'll start sharing the screen. So first it has to be noted that Finland is definitely of secondary importance when it comes to political use of history in Russia. So it's not one of the main targets for accusation of falsification of history by Russia in a way many other East European countries are, especially the ones that belong to the Soviet Union. But I would say that exactly that is what makes Finland an interesting case for comparison. And also during the last 5 years or so, there's been more attention to Finland by Russia in this context. The focus of Russia's attention in the case of Finland is on the period between 1941 and 44, and the occupation of East Karelia by Finns during the so-called Continuation War. And to put it shortly, the contemporary Russian war narrative concerning Finland emphasizes Finland's collaboration with Germany, and that allegedly makes the wartime Finland a fascist country. And consequently, Russians were victims of fascists during this occupation of Karelia. And as we shall probably discuss later on, in the case of ex-Soviet countries, the main historical narrative is slightly different. It is more about Soviet Union's alleged role as a savior of Europe. But anyway, the goal seems to be the same. And the goal seems to be to whitewash the history of the Soviet period, as well as the role of the Soviet Union in the World War II. And actually, there has also been resurrected claims that, prompted by Germany, Finland attacked the Soviet Union in 1939, instead of the Soviet Union attacking Finland, which was the case. And in general, external enemies, and also historical ones, are frequently and universally used to consolidate the internal cohesion. And what is important to note is that the audience of these accusations is Russian people rather than the Finns, and probably also the Russian minority living in Finland. The idea in the case of Finland may be to remind Russians of the nasty potential of this nice and seemingly harmless Western neighbor. So the message is to trust no one but Russia. And also intertwined with this is that the Russian media is very prone to accuse Finns for Russophobia in different contexts. So the first example of these recent cases are the competing narratives concerning Sandarmoh graves, which are located in Republic of Karelia. Some 7,000 victims of Stalin's terror were buried in the area during 1937 and 38. And the identities of these multinational victims were largely investigated by Yuri Dmitriev, who has actually just been committed to prison for 13 years for pedophilia. And these accusations seem to be completely false. Sandarmoh is a very popular place for visiting from all over Eastern Europe, especially by those people whose relatives were killed and buried in the place. But a new theory concerning Sandarmoh emerged in 2016. According to some Russian historians who had been supported by the Military Historical Society of Russia, have claimed that Soviet prisoners of war executed by Finns in between 1941 and 44 were buried in Sandarmoh. The foundation for these new claims was basically non-existent. A critical examination has shown that there has been no new archival findings, for instance. And also excavations have been carried out in Sandarmoh by Russians recently in the last couple of years, but no evidence of the Soviet prisoners of war have been found. And the goal seems to be to build a memorial for Soviet prisoners of war at Sandarmoh. And it does not take much interpreting to assume that the idea is to replace the controversial Soviet connotations with new ones that emphasize the wrongdoings of external enemy instead. And the second case is a very recent one, and it didn't make it to the report. And it's about accusations of genocide. In April this year, an investigation of alleged genocide of Slavs by Finnish occupators between 1941 and 44 was launched by the Investigation Committee of Russian Federation. And they claimed that mass destruction had taken place at Finnish prisoner of war and civil internment camps. They claimed that there would have been gas chambers and burying people alive and so forth. And Finnish historians have answered by emphasizing that there is absolutely no evidence of attempts of any systematic murdering of people during the occupation of Karelia. And these claims by Russia have been intertwined with, for instance, a movie about Russian children on a Finnish camp. There was a picture on the first slide from the film. And there have also been plans to build a camp museum in Karelia. And now actually a prop camp of some sort has been established, and it has been used to give patriotic training for school children this autumn. And what is interesting is that the announcement of the investigation has now been removed from the website of the investigation committee. And why, it is hard to say. But one quite cynical option is that the accusation simply has served its purpose. I mean that the idea has been planted in the minds of the consumers of Russian media, and actually bringing forth this investigation would be risky because there may not be any findings, and it also would provoke Finland unnecessarily. And to conclude, I would say that both of these Finnish cases are prime examples of media manipulation, and they are offering so-called alternative truths. So actually this option that the announcement was removed on purpose is quite plausible. And generally, it seems like in the context of political use of history, image is more important than the truth. And as we have recently seen in politics, if you just keep repeating your message, there will be always people who will believe it. So thank you. This is what I had to say at this point. So I think we will have a good discussion after the next presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Kati. Yes, please stay tuned in because we will return to you with some questions after other presentations. And before introducing our next speaker, I would like to play you a short interview with a historian from Latvia, who is also an author of the Latvia-related part of the study on abuse of history, Edgars Engizers. He was asked to describe the way. Okay, sorry for this technical hiccup. Unfortunately, we do not have we don't have this interview available for you now. I will later in our discussion maybe bring forward some points that Edgars Engizers was making, and we will try to discuss them with our speakers. So now, without further ado, I would like to introduce to you our second expert for today, Ivo Juurvee. He is head of the Security and Resilience Program at the International Center for Defense and Security. He has been a practitioner in the field of security for more than 13 years. Juurvee's professional and academic areas of interest are information warfare and intelligence services. He holds a PhD degree in history from the University of Tartu and a master's degree from the Central European University in Budapest. Juurvee is an author of 2 monographs and numerous articles and reports. Welcome, Ivo. And so, as we know, for a very long time, Estonia has been on the forefront of various defamation campaigns aimed at its history and trying to create some divisions in the Estonian society. So, can you sum up to us how was the abuse of history being used as a tool of Russia's influence in Estonia? Ivo, we cannot hear you, unfortunately. You probably have muted your...
Yes,
yes.
Can you hear me now?
Can
you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry for that, and delighted to be here. Thank you for this kind introduction. Can I share some slides as well, or what's the home regulations here during this telco?
Yes.
Okay, then just a sec, I will try to do it. Okay, well, I guess it's a pretty complex thing to summarize it in so few words as you asked to. I guess history has been in agenda between the Russian and Estonian relations already at least since late 1980s, when that signing of Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, due to which Baltic states lost their independence, was one of the I guess maybe main promoters behind the early independence movement. And I guess the most important PR coup or protest action that was carried out was the Baltic Way on the 50th anniversary of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the human chain from Tallinn via Riga to Vilnius to commemorate this event in 1989. But as a lead researcher, I would rather say some general things about Russia's historical narrative and its conduction in last years. Can you have my slides on the screen as well? Okay, thank you. This is the frequency of phrases Great Patriotic War and the World War II in the Interfax reporting for the Baltic States news. And as you can see from here, then there is always a peak when it's 5 or 10 years from 35, 45, 50 and so on years from the end of the war. In 2000, 2005, 2010, 2015, well, we can't see 2020 here, and in 20 it was a little bit different because of the COVID crisis as well. And the only difference here is 2007 due to Bronze Soldier riots in Tallinn, when it was also more an agenda. And so this is the central narrative of the Russian Federation, and which is somehow weird because nobody actually opposes it. So their fight against falsification of history is like, I don't know, fighting with ghosts or shadows, because I have never seen a person who would deny that they actually won the war. And now let's have a little look on the celebrations of this anniversary, the 9th of May. During the Soviet era, there were actually only 5 parades for that anniversary held on the Red Square. One that was actually not on the 9th of May, but in June in 1945. And then only 20 years after that, 30 years, 40 years and 45 years, well, when the political situation for the Communist Party already deteriorated, then they wanted to celebrate it more frequently. And now, in the current Russia, it is done every year. And this started with in 1995. If we recall, at that time, Russia had sent its troops into Chechnya in December 1994, and they were not doing well there. To say it slightly, it was quite a military disaster. So in such political situation, Mr. Putin recreated the addition of having military parades on 9th of May on the Red Square. If you don't have the military might or anything nice to celebrate in the current time, then it's always good to turn to history. And next thing that started already and has more importance abroad started during already Mr. Putin's reign. It was the St. George ribbon campaign founded in 2005. This has been dealt more in the report, and it's really quite wide nowadays. In 2007, there were riots in Estonia, which were partially caused by Russian propaganda and their media coverage of history. And more importantly, after that, there have been several legislative initiatives and also practical things done in making this celebration more powerful. In 2008, the Historical Memory Foundation was created, and it's not covered in the report because their correspondence has been leaked to media only lately. So now we have the possibility to read it on black and white, what were their causes and motivations. We don't have to speculate about it. And from their 10-year report, we can see what it was in the Baltic states. It was systematic opposing of historic propaganda, propagandistic concepts, as they call it, on occupations and genocide, exposure, discreditation, and so on. Well, just worth mentioning that exposure and discreditation, they are not very frequently used in academic discourse. However, these are words that were used by KGB already in 1960s and 70s, when there was a talk about active measures, or what we now would call influence activities abroad. But I will say a few words about that historical memory foundation in a minute. Later, in the same year, the tanks were back on the parade on the Red Square. Before that, there were only infantry units. Next year, there was the historical problems were written into national security strategy of the Russian Federation. Their rewriting of history was seen as a threat to national security in the field of culture. The same year, there was a commission commission was founded at the president of the Russian Federation to resist the attempts to falsify history in the way contradicting Russia's interests. This is the official title of this commission. So, of course, one may ask that if it's not contradicting to interests of Russia, is it allowed? It was quite a high-level commission consisting of almost 40 high-level people, but only 2 of them were historians. Mostly they were government employees, but also some from the parliament and the secret services. In 2009, it was also interesting threshold that Russian Federation Ministry of Defense website accused Poland in the start of the Second World War. Quite bold narrative that has been later supported by Putin himself as well. The commission didn't last long, but in 2012, there was a start of a new campaign that is also very much international, the Immortal Regiment campaign. To some extent, it has been dealt with in this report, but mostly it will probably be dealt in future reports of Stratcom COE or some other institution. Then law against rehabilitation of Nazis, which is actually maybe a good thing, but it also foresaw criminal punishment if somebody questions the part that Red Army has played in the history. So according to that, dealing with some war crimes and so on might be criminal offense according to Russian laws, and maybe even speaking about the secret protocols of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. And finally, this summer, the protection of historical memory of the defenders of fatherland is now integral part of the Russian constitution. And also this year, Mr. Putin has written a longer article on history. Basically, well, at least it was published under his name, basically repeating many narratives that have been circulating there already since late 1940s, the earliest. So, does it concern us abroad? And I think it does. Here, for example, is just part of this 10-year report, action report of the Fund of Historical Memory. And you can see here the different conferences that they have held in different countries. And as you can see, they are not doing it only in Russia, or not even only in the former Soviet Union, but also elsewhere in Europe. From the same source, we have also nice map speaking about the historians, policy experts, and journalists who are working together with the Fund of Historical Memory on the permanent basis. The most of them, 20, are in Belarus. 28. But you can see that also in France there are 16 people, and in many other countries a smaller amount of people. So yes, it does concern us in NATO and EU. The worst case outcome, I guess this we have already seen in 2007, and this has been dealt in detail with in the report by my own think tank. Well, not my own think tank, but the think tank where I'm working, ICDS. And last thing, how does it concern NATO? We don't have much public reporting on PSYOPs troops or the exercises of Russia's PSYOPs units, but there is one rare and interesting exception. In 2016, during the military exercises Cooperation 2016, there was a coverage in RT, formerly Russia Today, which told us about how they train their loudspeaker teams. And here is what was repeated over the loudspeakers again and again in different NATO languages. And especially I would like to draw your attention here. They say that you will suffer retribution and anger of the people who have never suffered defeat in any war, which is just fake news, not to say more. In the 20th century, if we recall it, then actually the Second World War was more or less the only war that the Soviet Union or Russia has won, if we don't include the Civil War, which one actually can't lose. The win will stay at home as well, in any case. It was started with Russia's defeat or in the Russo-Japanese War. They also lost the First World War to the Germans, although Germans lost the war eventually. They had separate peace treaty at the beginning of 1918, giving away major territories, including almost all Ukraine, not to speak about the Baltic states. And so on. Afghan war can't be considered victory as well. So if we don't deal with our history ourselves, it might be a problem if our soldiers at some point are faced with such claims, and they will take them at face value. It would be all from my side now.
Yes, thank you very much. And we will turn to discussion in a moment, but I'm hearing that now we can't play you that interview that I have promised. And here is a historian, Edgars Engizers. He was asked to describe the way hostile historic narratives are being communicated towards populations in Latvia. So let's watch this and then we will discuss.
First of all, I would like to say that it's not so much about history, it's more about politics. And also, how I was evaluating Latvian case, I came to conclusions, to findings that it's more because Russia is trying to securitize its history, and it's not so much about foreign affairs actually. It's not also about Latvia. It's more, in my eyes, it's more about Russian domestic affairs and domestic society building. As we know, history is used, and it's very useful to make national myths. And we are speaking about Russian national myth, which is constructed since 2000 approximately, which is based on the only one generic issue in recent history, which obviously Russian policymakers have found what is victory in the Second World War, or the Great Patriotic War as it is stated in Russia, in Russian history, as unpleasant years of Second World War when Soviet Union cooperated with Nazi Germany. It's striped out of this narrative. So everything is around a narrative of being liberators of Eastern Europe, of the world, and this winner's narrative is taken as a core of Russian nation building nowadays. So we are not speaking about different interpretations of history, which is ordinary practice in science, but we are speaking about very strict policy making targeted to domestic Russian society. What we can see here in Latvia, it's just a few outcomes, as also Latvia is a part of this historical time space, which is also connected with Russian history. And of course, Latvian history and Russian history are very connected. And the second reason why we are targeted here in Latvia by these narratives so much is that a large portion of Latvian society also is personally linked to Russian history or to Soviet history. They are Russians and they are using Russian language as the first one. So majority of them are consuming Russian these political products, propaganda products, not only because they are targeted by them, but just because they are consuming Russian narratives. So one thing what I can see is that we shouldn't go so much into this securitizing of history by our own, but I think that we can speak about Latvian and Russian historical relations very historically, scientifically, and very popular also with our people, with Europeans, with Russians, also in Russian, also about Russian history in Latvia. And I think if we want to build an inclusive society, we also should build inclusive historiography. I'm very pleased that in recent years we are starting to speak about Jewish history in Latvia, about German history in Latvia, also about Russian history in Latvia from perspective of our society and based on our historical also records, that we are not speaking only about these narratives based on the Second World War propaganda materials.
Some very interesting points there, and we will discuss these ideas further. So we are going back to our discussion. We have here Ivo Juurvee and Kati Parppei. I wanted to ask you both. So from your presentations and from your research, we see that two things that Russia is projecting towards the larger amount of countries outside the border, not only the Eastern European countries, is firstly accusations of falsification of history, and then some falsehoods, some false historical narratives. So have you thought about this, and can you tell what do you think is the larger aim here? Is there some ultimate goal in this strategy? How do you see that? Please, any of you can begin.
Do you want Kati or can I?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I guess it's as Edgar's very nicely pointed out, that it is much more about politics than about history. And if we ask about what would be their end goal in the field of politics or vis-a-vis NATO or European Union, then definitely to attack the center of gravity of EU or NATO, which is not actually the US Air Force or powerful economy, but it is unity. Unity among the allies, among the member states. And this is how history can assist them in this work. If those accusations of Nazism or fascism would be taken as real facts in the Western countries, for example, then it might cause some problems, not in the past, but of course currently. currently. And this is not something new. If we look back to 1960s, 1950s, similar accusations were used in Western Europe, and especially in order to divide Germany and France, that were in good political relations at the time, but it hadn't been the case during the war, of course.
Yes, I agree. And I would also say that there are basically two goals. I would say there are domestic goals and external goals. And this domestic goal is to consolidate the cohesion of Russian people by emphasizing historical myths and enemy images. And the external goal seems to be about this Russia's imagined moral authority of some kind, which is partly based on the idea that the Soviet Union heroically saved Europe from fascism. And that moral authority is used as a basis for contemporary role of Russia in the area. And also when that narrative is challenged by, for instance, reminding of the Soviet occupation and repression, it sort of also challenges contemporary Russia's role in the area in its previous sphere of interest and also contemporary sphere of interest. So, so there's this idea of Russia as a peacekeeper of some sort, while the Western countries are not trustworthy. So basically it's about geopolitical defense and insecurity also.
But do you think that these narratives are also being targeted to the populations of some of the European countries to create divisions within these populations? Not only divisions between European countries. Is that also one of the aims? Do you see that?
I would say yes, it's part of propaganda basically. So yes.
Yeah, well, not all the target audiences are direct target audiences. If they can't reach the people, then if they reach historians or politicians or journalists, this might be enough as well. If these people are distributing their narrative for them.
Have you, Kati, you spoke about some of the effects of what is going on. You mentioned that even though the official accusations were taken back, then still there is this lingering effect of repetition of falsehoods. Do you both see any effects of repetition of this false narratives? Of course, Ivo, you have mentioned the famous Bronze Night in Tallinn as one of the actual physical effects where we saw the results of this falsehoods. But is there anything else that you can see how this accusations of falsification of history or the actual fake narratives are affecting populations within Estonia or Finland or elsewhere in Europe?
Well, fortunately, it's usually not the thing that you would see in the streets directly, or something that would have a very short-term impact. I assume that, or at least I hope that that what happened in 2007, it is the ultimate outcome that such things can have, and also this may happen maybe once, but not repeated everywhere and all the time. However, what would be the problem if these falsehoods, if they penetrate the academic or popular historical literature? And in the past, we have many such examples, but it's very hard to calculate how good are they doing at this precise moment. Unfortunately, we can see it only with some historical distance. We can say now how successful they were 5 or 10 years ago, but it's not so easy to say how successful they are at this point.
Yeah, and in the case of Finland, as I said, it's not so much about the Finnish population. It's more about this Russian audience. So these narratives live their own life in Russian media mostly. But also in Finland, we have this small minority of Finns who actually usually say that why do we have to produce those nasty news about Russia? And they are actually quite Russia-minded in a way. And they can be quite easily influenced by these false historical news from Russia. So unfortunately, that is the case. But it's I wouldn't say that it's a big group of people. It's small and quite somehow quite a loud minority sometimes.
Okay, thank you, Kati. I also had another question for you. When I was introducing you to our audience, we said that you have actually studied creation of enemy images in Russia in a quite an extended period of time, and that this can help us understand the current history politicization. Is there anything from that area, based on this your research of how enemy images have been created? Can you add anything? What lessons or conclusions can we draw there?
I would say that basically in every conflict there has been, not only in conflicts, but in all kind of interaction with other countries, there have usually been some arch enemies, and those arch enemies tend to have similar qualities, and the image is quite dualistic in the sense that if you scratch a fascist, you usually can find, for instance, a Turkish enemy under it or a Mongol. So basically these enemy images have been adapted to suit different purposes, different contemporary political purposes. And also there is this interesting thing that Russia blames others for falsification of history. And I would say that that is exactly the same tactics as it uses in politics. For instance, in the presidential addresses, it is quite often emphasized that Russia never starts a conflict. It only defends its interests. So there is this some kind of narrative of innocence that keeps repeating through history. And it can also be seen in this context, that instead of just offering these false narratives, then Russia actually blames others for doing that. So it fits in the picture in a way.
Thank you. We are receiving some questions already, and I would like to remind our audience that you can ask questions to our speakers in the comment section under our Facebook and YouTube broadcast. So I would like to address some of those questions to you. One of our viewers is asking how to combat this type of serious political smear campaign. What do you think? What are the tools to use in this case? Is it some sort of debunking or some fact-checking initiatives, or what should be those tools?
Ivo, do you want to start?
Yes, I can. I assume that there is no silver bullet. It's not something that could be dealt with very efficiently in very short time. So our countermeasures should be also long-term. Of course, the high-quality historical research is the keystone of it, but I assume that this is something that has already been conducted currently as well. definitely we should pay attention to the quality of teaching history in our schools, because this is something that bears fruit in maybe several decades. But when these people who are at school now, when they become decision makers, then that they would know history and not just be easily fooled by some false accusations. And a very important thing to kept in mind is that debunking, it's not in that sense that not everything is falsified, but sometimes just leaving some things out is very important as well. For example, when let's use the Mr. Putin's recent article as an example, that of course he attacks the Western allies for Munich Agreement of 1938, which I agree. For those who are not so acquainted with history, there are 4 states, Germany, Italy, France, and United Kingdom. They agreed that that Germany should get some territories from the Czechoslovakia. And the idea behind it was that in that way they can appease Hitler. And I do agree with Putin that such things should not be repeated nowadays. It was very stupid to assume that if Stalin, after the Second World War, if he receives half of Europe, then he is appeased and he doesn't want to have the other half. Or if, for example, to think that if Russia or Putin now gets parts of Georgia or parts of Ukraine, then he is going to be appeased and he doesn't have any other territorial claims. But in the same article, for example, he forgets that the Soviet Union was expelled from the League of Nations in 1939 because of aggression against Finland. And yeah. So I would stop here.
Yes, Kati.
Yeah. Yes, yeah, I agree with Eva that education is definitely of utmost importance, and not just education on history, but also in general media literacy. Because I would say that the same people who are prone to accept and be influenced by misinformation concerning history are also more prone to propaganda in general. So this is why media literacy education is quite a significant tool to fight falsification of history.
Do you both agree with that?
That?
Yes, Eva, please.
Yes, I can also sign to that what Kati just said. I just agree.
Would you both agree with the historian from Latvia, Edgars Engezers, that whom we have quoted before? His interview was played to you. Who said that it is important to include national minorities in the national historic narratives in Latvia, Estonia, Finland, elsewhere. He spoke of Latvia, of course, in order to make these populations maybe less susceptible to some alternative versions, to create this inclusion feeling maybe amongst these populations. Do you think this needs to be done, and do you think this is being done, or maybe not enough?
I assume that this is a general trend in historical research pretty much everywhere, maybe except Russia and then some other dictatorships. That the idea that history is something concerning only politics or only middle-aged white men, it's already outdated in most of the world. So everything that concerns minorities is more and more on agenda on daily or yearly basis in historical research. And this, I guess, will sooner or later touch upon the Russian or Soviet perception of the Second World War or Great Patriotic War as well, because violence against women and so on in the late stages of the war and conducted by the victorious Red Army probably will soon be dealt with as well, I assume.
Mm-hmm. I agree. It has been done. It's being done at the moment, this inclusion of minorities in national histories. So it's definitely a trend in historical research at the moment. So, and I also think it's very important that it should be done.
Up this topic about tackling this narratives and accusations of falsification of history, do you think there is anything that is not being done? Can you maybe critique the responses that exist at the moment? Is there something that is lacking?
Well, I assume that more or less we already have touched upon the things that the education on media literacy in general and also on history can always be enhanced. And I don't think that our answer should be symmetric. That if Putin writes something, then next day, I don't know, some high-ranking European or American politician should write an article on how he understands history and so on. We shouldn't get to the same level. I guess we can trust our historians community.
Yes, Kati, please.
Yeah, I was just about to say that, for instance, in Finland, it usually is so that, Finnish politicians have decided that sometimes it's best not to pay too much attention to provocations, though. So they usually do not give very strong answers to these accusations, and they leave it to historians. So I guess it depends on the case, what should be done and what not.
Yeah, sure. But what we can maybe keep in mind that historians quite frequently, they are modest people. They do their research, but they don't always, I don't know, like to give media interviews and be in the spotlight all the time. So maybe we should somehow encourage them or help them in that sense.
Yeah, and also one problem is that also historians can be biased in their views, like, for instance, like some Russian historians who have been presenting these new theories about Sandarmoch. They have this authority of historians, which is a bit problematic.
Yeah, well, sure, but it's not so easy, I guess, to be historian now in Russia, as it wasn't easy being a historian in the Soviet Union as well. Because if you want to have your job, if you want to have your family unharmed, and I'm not meaning here physical harm, but just to have positions or a possibility to study at the university and so on, then more or less your things have to be in the line with what Putin says.
Yes, unfortunately, yes. Mm-hmm.
So, because there are of course differences like Mark Solonin and so on, but they are not numerous.
Ivo, we actually have one question from the audience regarding the historians in Russia. And the question is, how do you see the role and the status of the Russian historians that disagree with the official historical narratives and the narratives of falsification of history? Are they doomed to be silenced, or they may have a contribution in relation to dismantling the fake narrative? So basically, I guess in relation to what you said, the question is there any hope for them? Are they getting through, or all of them are being silenced, and is there something happening there? Is there research?
Well, I guess it's more like a philosophical question. I don't think that they have much chance in short run, but I think that in long run they will prevail anyway, because it's well, the truth, it has a little bit, I'd say, a longer lifespan hopefully than the lies. We saw what happened with the Soviet Union historical narrative at the 1990s, when the archives were opened and it was possible to research history properly. And unfortunately, now it's not the case in Russia. Most of the archives, they are not open to the historians unless they are in friendly relations with powers. And so that's the case now, but I am optimist that sooner or later it will change anyway.
Kati?
Yeah, I was just about to say that it's interesting how this window opened at the beginning of the 90s, and it was that window for Russia to examine its history in a critical manner, but then they decided to close that window. But maybe that will be opened someday in the future, I don't know.
Okay, well, I think that this nicely concludes our conversation, and with some hope for the future. And I have to say, so we heard some interesting ideas today, and we heard that I guess we hope for maybe more publicly speaking historians in the European countries that can strongly promote the scientific truth about history, and yes, and we look forward to the future when we can see the research from historians in Russia. Is there anything else that you would like to add? How we can conclude this conversation? Is there anything any point that maybe you think our audience should take away from this?
Yes, well, I guess that not only historical research, but also the research on how Russia uses or abuses history should be continued. Because as Kati mentioned, there are some things that have been left out of the report because they emerged only later. While writing the first draft of the roof article, it was before the Christmas last year. And now when I had the possibility to revise it, there were many things I wanted to add. And also the slides that I prepared for last Thursday, I could redo for today. So there are new examples and new interesting information or new tricks coming in on almost daily or weekly basis, and I guess this is also something that our public and our decision makers would have to be acquainted with.
It's quite a frustrating topic for a historian because new stuff keeps coming all the time. So, yeah.
Thank you. There is just one last question. While I was already concluding this conversation, there is a very interesting question that came in, and if you don't mind, we have a couple of minutes. I'd like to ask this to you. It's about the audiences of the false historic narratives. We always hear that older generation is prone to myth and glorification of shared Soviet past. This is the common understanding of the situation. But do you see any such attitudes amongst young adults and which are raised by an older generation? Do you think this is one problem? You already spoke of its importance of history being taught at schools, but do you see this sentiment passing on?
Kati,
yes, please.
Ivo, go ahead. I have to think about it for a couple of seconds.
Well, I would like to think about it as well, but I'm not so sure if the historical perceptions that people have, how prone they are for changing. On the other hand, if there is some factual knowledge that the people don't know, then they can change their views quite fast. For example, in my past, I have been studying with Russian students who have studied abroad, and I have found out that sometimes they, for example, they don't know that on 17th of September 1939, the Soviet Union attacked Poland. So basically, the attack was conducted in cooperation with Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. And such things do have their impact if the people find out that they have been lied to, or at least important information has been kept hidden from them for a long time. But if there are some strong belief that people have believed for decades already, then I'm afraid it's not very, I would say, easy target audience to deal with.
Yeah, as an image researcher, I have to say that usually images that have been formed in childhood, for instance, they are quite difficult to change. But I also believe that there is a strong tendency of critical thinking amongst younger people. So, I believe that there is hope in this sense, that people are prone to receive this new information and change their perceptions of issues. So.
All right, well, this is a very optimistic note to conclude our discussion, with hope for critical thinking. And I want to thank both of our speakers, Kati, Parppei, and Ivo, Juurvee. Thank you so much for spending this hour with us and sharing your knowledge. And I also want to say goodbye to you, our audience. We will shortly be back with you. The next Stratcom Talks webinar is already in 2 days. On Wednesday, December the 2nd, we will discuss Russia's strategy and activities in cyberspace. So we see you very soon. And I want to thank you, all of you watching, asking comments. I wasn't able to ask all of them, but we will try to continue interesting discussions only in 2 days. Thank you very much, and goodbye.